This is Reimagine Law, a podcast about legal education and careers.
Welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for our discussion on social mobility in the legal sector and how law firms can support legal professionals from less privileged backgrounds to progress their careers. We'll touch on the research and evidence underpinning progression, the tools available to support it, and why establishing the right culture and environment matters such a great deal. I'm Elizabeth Robertson, partner and white-collar crime specialist at Skadden Arps, an international law firm headquartered in New York. I'm also a board member of Prime, which is an alliance of law firms across the UK and Republic of Ireland, determined to improve access to and socio-economic diversity within the legal profession. 2021 marks Prime's 10th anniversary. In the past decade, law firms have made significant progress on improving access to the legal profession for those from less privileged backgrounds. But the next big challenge is ensuring they progress their careers. I'm joined today by Tim Smith, partner at Bryan Cave Leighton Paisner, where he specialises in planning and environmental law. Tim is also chair of Prime's Partner Advisory Group and a trustee of the Bridge Group. We also have with us Simon Reichwald. Simon is strategic lead for talent at My Kind of Future and a delivery partner for the Government Commission Task Force to improve socio-economic diversity at senior levels in UK financial and professional services firms. Tim, may I ask you to kick off by speaking about the latest evidence for and thinking on progression?
I'm going to begin by saying something about the research that's been done into social mobility in the legal sector. In some ways, social mobility is the new kid on the block for diversity. There have been programs for gender and ethnic diversity run for some time. But I guess one of the reasons why social mobility is a new emergent is because it's coming more into the national consciousness. What we used to call the North-South divide, which the government now likes to call the levelling up agenda, is becoming more prominent, and it's feeding through into the different professions. To be fair, the legal sector is one of the first to have embraced it seriously, and it's done so out of a general sense of equity and fairness, that if you've got talent, you ought to be able to give talent an opportunity to thrive. And so a number of firms have undertaken initiatives to improve the social economic diversity of their entrants as trainees, supported, of course, by organisations like Prime over the last 10 years. More recently, there have been two really interesting pieces of work undertaken, research by the Bridge Group. And just in the interests of transparency, I should declare that I'm a trustee of the Bridge Group. My firm has been involved in both of the pieces of research that I'm about to talk about. The first piece of research, which was launched about 3 years ago, was looking at early careers solicitors and the socio-economic diversity of trainees up to 1 year post-qualification experience. And there were a number of very interesting conclusions that were derived from that research, one of which was that people from a lower socioeconomic background were more likely to be high performers within their organizations, as judged by things like appraisal grades and evaluations. Perhaps more scarily, the research shows that they were also more likely to leave their organizations, and the reasons for that were many and varied. But law firms have looked at socioeconomic diversity because it's the right thing to do. If ever they needed an economic reason for doing it, that is it, surely. It costs hundreds of thousands of pounds to introduce and train people. If your highest performers are also the ones more likely to leave, then there's clearly something is going wrong. So for that reason, law firms have focused for some time on the entry level to their firms and socioeconomic diversity. That brings with it, I suppose, a slight danger of complacency, which is that one often hears, in whichever diversity forum we're talking about, that if you sort the pipeline out, the trickle-up effect over time will mean that the socioeconomic diversity of your more senior levels within the organisation will also improve. The second piece of research, the more recent research undertaken by the Bridge Group, explodes that myth. I'm bound to comment that I haven't seen that proven to be correct in any diversity strand that we've looked at, and certainly not socioeconomic diversity. What the second Bridge Group research showed was that that isn't the case, and that there is a high drop-off rate for people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds as they advance towards partnership. It takes longer, a year and a half longer, for people from a lower socioeconomic background to achieve partnership as compared with more advantaged colleagues. And when one takes into account intersectionality, if you're a woman, it takes longer still. If you're a person of Black heritage, it takes longer still. And so there are definitely concerns in there. And what the research looked at was some of the reasons why that might be the case. And I think I can distill from it a couple of points. Firstly, if we think about the qualities that we as law firms prize in our partner candidates, very often they put a percentage on social and cultural capital, which people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds don't have to the same degree. Do you have a good network? Are you able to get on well with clients, introduce and sustain new business? Which, if you're somebody whose peers have all gone into senior positions within potential client organizations, it's very easy for you to make a case that you are a business builder, which most firms will look for with their partners. But I think even beyond that, if one looks at personal qualities, then the sort of qualities that are prized in candidates are things like confidence, the ability to command authority, whether these people are seen to fit in to the dominant culture of the organization. And people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds often find themselves penalized in those characteristics as compared with their more advantaged colleagues. I think the final thing to say on that, which I have found to be interesting, is I know Simon has spoken before about the journey travelled by people from where they begin to where they end up. And somebody who is, let's say, from an inner London comprehensive school on free school meals, who becomes a senior associate at a major international law firm, is much more likely to be happy with their lot. They're likely to look back and say, my goodness me, look how far I've come. And the impetus to push on to that final stage and become a partner is perhaps not there to the same degree. It isn't just about a sense of entitlement that they're lacking, but it's about the distance travelled, more likely to be happy with their lot, less likely to press for partnership in the way that their more advantaged colleagues will. So those were my thoughts just on the research and what the research illustrates. But Simon, I know you've got some thoughts that you'd like to share about my kind of future and its experience in this area.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. And I think you're absolutely right. That distance travelled is such an important one in terms of people, the risk of people stopping, and particularly as it gets harder for them. So if they're finding it harder and harder to progress, and they also look at how far they've come, there's a real risk that they stop. And that latent talent is not maximized both for the individual and for that organization. So that whole productivity argument comes into play when you look at that distance distance travel piece. And of course, the overriding a huge driver for greater diversity, full stop, is that piece around diversity of thought and moving away from groupthink. And the more diverse people you have making decisions at all kinds of levels within an organization, the more likely the decisions are to be good ones, and of course to the benefit of your clients that you are representing and working for. Tim.
I think one thing which will be interesting to see is how clients can become agents for change in this area of diversity. We've become used to pitches and presentations to potentially new clients asking us to explain what our diversity policies are, gender and ethnic diversity in particular, and especially from public sector clients. But more and more clients are being encouraged to look at their own socioeconomic diversity and their service providers. And so once clients start to take more of an interest in it, I think the further economic reason for law firms looking at it becomes particularly important as well.
My personal view is that clients have an important role to play, but to date, I think it's been fairly limited in its effectiveness. And we've seen a number of very high-profile international organisations via their general councils or boards stipulate some very strong benchmarks, both in terms of hours charged by diverse or socially mobile candidates, penalties for fees if you don't comply. But the reality is that those mechanisms have either failed or get lost in the day-to-day running of one's business. And the other truth, in my experience at least, is that certainly big law firms have real difficulty in meeting really onerous criteria in that regard. And it's also quite difficult, certainly on an international basis, setting that criteria, because working in an international law firm as I do, problems really vary from country to country and indeed continent to continent. So I'm much more supporter of a really good dialogue with clients, working together perhaps on pro bono projects, or for example, Barclays and Vodafone are very proactive in their support of Prime. I'm much more an advocate for those kind of conversations to build awareness, certainly at the stage that we're at now in terms of this area.
I think the difference between carrot and stick is the important one here. You're much more likely to bring people with you if you can show that it's a shared value and a shared objective that you're following. The research is interesting. It's a call to arms to the sector, but much more interesting, I think, for our audience will be to hear about some of the tools that we can use to put it into practice, how we deal with the problem which has now been diagnosed. What's the cure to this problem that we've now diagnosed? Simon, I know you've got some thoughts that you'd like to share with us about tools and support programs.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks, Tim. And there's so many tools and work is being undertaken to address this issue of progression. In the interest of time today, I'm going to pick on two. I'm going to spend a bit more detail and time on one of them. But the first one I just want to pick up on is obviously, and I think we've managed to get through the first part of this podcast without mentioning the word data. But data is obviously a really important one, and that measuring of progress. And I think so the ability to measure progress is hugely important. It shouldn't stop actions. Firms starting to take actions ahead of them getting data, but clearly getting data to know where your start point is, how you compare to others, so benchmarking, and then progressing on is really important. And when it comes to social mobility, the key data question, if you look at the latest research from the Social Mobility Commission, is parental occupation at 14. So it's not free school meals, it's not first generation to go to university, though they are questions you can ask. But what the Social Mobility Commission research shows is that if you're going to ask one question, the key question that is going to give you the best indicator of the challenges that come from a low socioeconomic background is parental occupation at 14. So that would be the one that we'd be encouraging you to adopt. The second piece I wanted to talk about, and I know we'll have a discussion around this, the three of us, is from a tools point of view that I wanted to talk about, really came through incredibly strongly through some current work I'm doing as part of the Government Commission Task Force looking at improving socioeconomic diversity at a senior level in financial and professional services. And as part, I'm one of my kind of future, one of the delivery partners for the task force. And as part of my early work, I was fortunate enough to interview a huge number of very senior leaders across financial and professional services. And they all talked to me about, as part of talking about why they want to be involved, they talked to me about their journey that they'd been on from a professional career standpoint. And almost to an individual, all of them talked about one of the powerful changes that happened in their life that led to the success they had is they got lucky. And the luck came from someone spotted their potential and their talent and essentially mentored them. So the power of mentoring comes through so consistently for people who have succeeded. And lots of these senior leaders that I've spoken to would be examples of people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. So mentoring is played a huge part in senior people's success, and there's the data to back it up as well. When you look at the research around mentoring, people who are mentored are 5 times more likely to be promoted than those who are not. The mentors themselves are 6 times more likely to be promoted. 89% of people who are mentored go on to become a mentor. So there's that whole kind of paying it forward, paying it back piece that's hugely powerful. Now, of course, there's a very clear difference between mentoring and sponsorship. Mentoring is usually is someone who supports an individual from a broad perspective and shares their experiences and the journey that they've been on. Sponsorship is obviously much more typically a senior individual who's seeking to proactively progress the career of someone else. So there are differences between the two, I appreciate. And the final point I'm going to make, because I know both Tim and Elizabeth, you've got strong views on this. Mentoring is really widespread. So 71% of Fortune 500 companies run mentoring programs, but only a third of people have mentors. So it feels to me like mentoring is for the few, not for the many. And that's something that perhaps we need to address. And I know there's a growing amount of technology being used as an enabler for mentoring to make that happen. And the other piece to talk about is marginal mentoring. There's lots of mentoring programs going on, but they tend to deliver marginal benefit because it's really hard to measure, or it's hugely time consuming to measure the impact. There's often no choice with who the mentee gets as a mentor, and all the research shows if they have choice, it works better. Often mentors aren't trained. It can take time for the relationship to get set up. So there are lots of challenges with mentoring programs that mean that too often firms get marginal impact, whereas something that's very close to our heart and my kind of future is mentoring with purpose, where it really delivers the values and outcomes that are needed. But as I said, Tim, I know you've got a view, and I know, Elizabeth, you've got a very personal experience you wanted to share, but let's start with Tim.
Thanks, Simon. I think visibility is the first issue we've got to tackle, isn't it? Because social background is a masked characteristic. You can't tell at a glance by looking at somebody what their social background is. And indeed, I recall having this conversation with Nicholas Cheffing's chair of Prime, that 3 of us were sat in a room. And he kind of sat back and he said, if you were a fly on the wall in this room, you would have no idea what the social background of the 3 of us is. You can't tell by where we are. You can't tell from what we're saying. You can't tell from how we're saying it. And yet, once you start to have those conversations, those revealing insights, Simon, that you mentioned from the interviews that you conducted early on in the City of London work, you begin to see somebody's story emerge. And that story itself can be empowering, that you see somebody who's come from a particular background and has overcome particular challenges to get to where they have. I think the one thing just to add about that as a segue into what I know Elizabeth wants to say about mentoring is that once people are visible as being people who are supportive and who have maybe characteristics in common, it's more easy to select potential mentors from amongst them once you know whom they are. But Elizabeth, you've got some great experience of mentoring that I know you want to share.
No, so listening to you both talk, it's very interesting how much the data supports my personal experience, which is obviously anecdotal. I'm going to talk just about a couple of things: confidence and curiosity, which I'm not sure you can manage in the data. But I'll just start with my own journey, and without a doubt, one day in 1992, somebody took a chance on me. He was a partner at Stevenson Harwood. He gave me a job as a paralegal. working in his effectively embryonic sort of white collar crime team. And from there, my career really took off. And that has stayed with me always, that I must repay that generous and confident gesture of that individual. The other thing that I think I learned then and again later, as I've had other mentors, is the best mentors are not people like yourself. I've also learned that in the context of gender and women's diversity, it's very easy to talk to people that you're comfortable with or people like yourself. And that's why I talk about curiosity. It's great to be mentored by people who will challenge you, who will ask you questions, who are different from you. And I've also had very much that experience, and two other mentors that always come to mind for me. One is a female partner at Slaughter and May, and one is a male partner at Skadden, my own firm, both of whom challenged me and really sort of called me out on my complaints about why I wasn't getting on, for example. But they also utterly supported me and gave me confidence to take the next steps. And just talking about my partner at Skadden, he said something to me after a meeting just last year, actually, which just shows that this is a continuing journey. He came out of a meeting and he said, just completely, casually, there wasn't really much thought in it, I don't think. But he just says it's fascinating how you can reach places in a room that I can't reach. And I just thought that said such a great deal about him in terms of his generosity in praising others. And I think, that's a great sign of a mentor, as somebody who's confident in themselves and is very comfortable praising others. And the other thing was curiosity, really, which is he was inquiring and thinking about, why was I able to reach places in a client room that he couldn't, and acknowledging that difference was good in a very sort of gentle way. But I just felt so empowered after that conversation. So they're the sort of things that I would draw out from the power of mentoring. It goes on, I'm 25 years into my career now. It goes on. Confidence, curiosity, and the data. Follow the data. So that's really what I would like to say.
Elizabeth, thank you. There's so many really powerful things you said in there about the impact that mentoring can have. And I was lots of those grabbed me, but one of them was that a thing that's often overlooked is what makes a great mentor. And I think one of the things you've picked up on there is that generosity of spirit to give their time and to talk about what me as a mentor can't give, but you as my mentee are able to give. So that generosity of spirit, seeing what other people can bring that you can't, even though you're their mentor and it's supposed to be this hugely wise person who knows all those things. So that generosity of spirit really struck me, Elizabeth. So thank you for being so open and honest about that experience that you've had. As we move on to the last part of this podcast, tools like mentoring we've talked about clearly can have a hugely impactful and positively impact on people's careers and people's lives as a whole. But you've also got to make sure you've got the right environment and the right culture for mentoring to thrive. And part of that is obviously building an inclusive culture. Elizabeth and Tim, I know you've both got views on that, but Elizabeth, do you want to share some thoughts in the last number of minutes for this podcast around some things to develop an inclusive culture?
Again, my experience in my firm now actually mirrors a lot of what you said, Simon, in your introduction, and we are trying to follow the data with the caveat that because we're an international law firm, different things work slightly differently in different jurisdictions. But we certainly, a recent sort of discovery is the importance and feedback we've heard that mentoring should continue. So we have a very powerful and effective, we think, mentoring program up to 3 years post-qualification. But as you've just heard me articulate, and certainly our senior lawyers have articulated, actually mentors can be really valuable throughout your career, however senior you are. So that's one thing I would advocate and support. the other thing is, I think and they're linked in a way. And it's again about difference. Don't necessarily have a mentor in your practice area, not even necessarily in your team, so that you can really have an open dialogue. And also, I think it's important that mentors are powerful, because we also have to be pragmatic in our career. And having a mentor who's just a really nice person but not influential in a business, whether it's a law firm or another kind of business, is only going to take you so far. And so you do need to be quite strategic in terms of who you are picking as your mentor. And you may have one or two or even three different mentors. And then just very briefly, perhaps think about having a mentor outside of your business. So I mentor, at the request of a client, one of their junior lawyers. She's actually a compliance professional. She works in a similar area to me. And there's no formal process around it other than we meet regularly and it's transparent. So the General Counsel asked me to do it. But that's a very different kind of relationship that's also very valuable.
Elizabeth, I completely agree with that. There's two really important points to draw out from what you've said. The first one is you've got to find somebody who is willing to do what you expect of them, somebody who's doing it under protest or because it's part of a program that they've been co-opted to is not going to be any good. But one thing which comes through loud and clear from what you've said, and this has been my experience as well, is that the people who have benefited from mentoring themselves are the ones who are most passionate about doing it for the next generation. It's a lovely phrase that I heard used by a consultant based out of the US, which is always make sure you send the elevator back down again. But once you've benefited from it, make sure that you benefit somebody else. But I think the other point is there is a distinction, isn't there, between a mentor and a sponsor. A mentor is maybe inward looking, somebody who will help you to develop your skills and show your full potential. And that might be the same as a sponsor, but a sponsor is the person who will sit in a room and bang the table and say, no, on this job, you must have Elizabeth. We've got to have Elizabeth promoted. She's got all the qualities that's needed. So it's your cheerleader almost, as well as your coach, which is provided by the mentor. They might be the same person, but they don't have to be. And I think that's one of the thoughts which comes out of the research on mentoring. Mentoring and sponsorship are different objectives, and they may not always be found within the same person. The impression that's sometimes got when we talk about mentoring and support schemes for people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds is that they're somehow lacking and have got things that need to be supplemented. But Elizabeth, you made the really important point that once somebody is given an opportunity and they seize it, then the sky's the limit. And you've clearly flourished with the opportunity that you described you'd been given starting out at Stevenson Harwood. And my own experience would support that if you've got somebody who has struggled against more adversity to get to where they have, they're hungry for it. And if you give them the opportunity, they will seize it with both hands and they will exploit it to the best of their ability. So all you've got to do is give them that opportunity and they will take it. And they will have more focus and drive very often than the people who've had it come easier to them as they've grown up through their organisation. So I wouldn't want it to be thought that here are second-class citizens, that we're doing the best that we can to promote them to become first-class citizens. The kind of people that we're talking about have qualities which are not matched by their peers, and we just need to find the opportunity for those to be developed out.
That final point is so important, and I see that in every aspect of life, what you've talked about, Tim, which is something you earn, you just value it more. And I see that at entry level. If I put my early talent hat on, and running assessment days where we have people who want to join the organization, so people who don't currently work for the organization on the assessment day, but also existing employees. And I've more often than not, I see existing employees on an assessment day underperform because they have this sense of, well, I already work here. It's a shoe in. I'm just walking through the process. they don't fight as hard for it because they think it's bound to be in the bag because I work here already. So I think that point about seizing opportunities and making the most of opportunities, I think all my experiences and my very personal experience is that where I've had to fight for something and I've got it, I've made a hell of a lot more of it. And I think that's the opportunity that is available to organizations with all that latent talent that they have in their organization. And coming back to one of the first comments that we made about the business case for greater socioeconomic diversity, what better reason? And what the research shows around mentoring, and I touched on this a bit earlier, but Elizabeth, you made a really good point, which made me think it's worth picking back up again, is choice. Too often what happens with mentoring programs is if you put your hand up to be mentored, you talk about what it is you want, and then you're assigned somebody. And actually what the evidence shows is if the mentee has choice as to who they have as their mentor, then the results are much improved. And I think that also then helps support that piece that you talked about earlier, Elizabeth, which is the ability, therefore, to choose mentors that are not like you. So by empowering choice, and again, technology can play a really powerful role in enabling that choice and making that much easier. The other point I wanted to pick up on, which I think is a really overlooked one, and I'm really pleased you mentioned it, Elizabeth, is having mentors outside of your own firm. And if I think about lots of the conversations I've been having with firms about their mentoring programs, they're really keen. What tends to happen is people become more senior within an organization, actually becomes quite hard to find a mentor as you become more and more senior. And therefore looking outside of your firm it can be in a way to address that, as well as bringing the benefits of having a mentor who's outside of your organization. It's a bit like having your own non-exec director, as if you were a board yourself, who just brings that different perspective and a wider perspective, which will help you, particularly as you become more senior. As you become more senior, it's not so much about your skills, it's about your wider awareness from an economic standpoint and so on and so forth. And again, if I particularly think about law firms and the different areas of focus that you have from an industry perspective, having a mentor who's not in a law firm but works in an industry sector you're part of, who's very senior, could be really valuable.
Elizabeth, any comments you want to wrap up with on the value of mentoring and mentoring with purpose, to borrow Simon's phrase?
I was listening to those remarks, and I do agree with a lot of that's been said. At university, I didn't have a grant, and my dad couldn't give me an allowance, so I had to work 2 nights a week. I still remember that kind of sick feeling of going to the cash machine and wondering if it was going to give you £5 then, which would have given you a good night out. But I also am very mindful about any kind of stereotypes, and I'm fascinated by the most motivated young people that I work with, and many of them are from less environments where they have had to work hard and have always had part-time jobs, and the education hasn't been so good. But I'm also fascinated by children who have had those benefits and are still immensely committed and immensely hardworking. And I've spent quite a lot of time lately thinking about why that is. Is it their parents? Is it their life experience? Is it inherently who they are? And for me, whatever their background, they are the qualities that I look for. How much do you want to do this? How driven are you? And how, crucially for me, willing are you to work with a variety of different people in a really open and collaborative way? So I guess that would be my observation.